Hi everybody, I'm Jim. Nice to see you all again. So today, I'm going to be talking about professional UIs in LabVIEW. So you're all professional LabVIEW developers, and part of your job is to build UIs, so I guess that makes you all professional UI developers. However, I'm sure not everybody in this room considers the UI is really always an important part of the deliverable. Maybe you do, actually, though. So, why professional UIs in LabVIEW? Anybody want to kind of popcorn style? You can shout them out. Go for it, Jen.
It's how customers judge the software.
It's how customers judge the software, right? Any others? That's it. All right. Yeah, I was talking to Chen last night, and I think I might have mentioned that to him. So, I'm going to be talking about why professional UIs in LabVIEW, and JKI likes to put free tools out there, so I'm also going to be talking about some free tools from JKI that will help people develop professional UIs. So, who really cares about making their UIs look good? Okay, good. Those are a lot more hands than I expected from the popcorn style answers, so thank you for caring, everybody. So I imagine if you care a lot, you probably understand like maybe when you should care, or maybe does everybody always care about making UIs look good? Always, all the time?
Well, you mean always.
I mean, like,
In your sleep.
yeah, I know, yeah. Yeah, you're like reading about the icon editor, dropping glyphs. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to care about it all the time. So I think it's important to understand how LabVIEW user interfaces come to be. You're all architects, and so you work on code developed by other people a lot. Maybe you inherit code, or you work on customer projects where you've gotten code from a customer that started a project. It's important to know how these things typically evolve. Most of us are architects, so we spend time strategizing, UMLing, and designing, and then, go that way. But most LabVIEW UIs, I would imagine, were created by an engineer with LabVIEW while building a hardware system over time. And so, typically, what this looks like is I'm building a system. I have my hardware technology. I get the NI hardware, slap some I/O on there. I go, into Max, toggle some bits, write a VI, get some low-level stuff working, proof of concept, and these engineers kind of incrementally build up functionality from the bottom up. And typically, what ends up happening is these start out as like manual interfaces. Eventually, maybe there's some configuration file. But as the system grows in complexity, and I wish I had a good graphic for this, but it ends up evolving into a big UI with a bunch of tab controls to divide up the different kind of functionalities, like one for maybe like load, like my configuration of my system, a tab for each like low-level hardware component, maybe a tab for like larger subsystem collections of subcomponents, and then like a tab all the way on the right, because that's the one that they did last, for actually like doing a run. And maybe there's a tab for the one like technician of the system who doesn't want to see anything, and so that one just has like, a load recipe and a big run button or something like that. And that's okay. That's how they evolve, and that's an example of an engineer trying to put in good effort into what makes the most sense to get a return on investment. And then also too, maybe that engineer, they're an expert, so they know what all those different tabs do. They know what the buttons do. They know which order they have to push the buttons, where not to push the buttons, and stuff like that. Okay, so that's a brief history of LabVIEW evolution, LabVIEW application. So often those hardware systems are really amazing, right? Like in LabVIEW, people are doing cool stuff. And it may add a lot of value for those systems to look great too. It might not always add value, but oftentimes it does, especially when things are moving like out of the garage phase with the one systems engineer who put the whole thing together, and then more people are on the team, there's more stakeholders, et cetera. So when does it add value to have a professional UI? And it's really two questions. The first is, when does usability drive value? And we'll talk about what the usability is. And then, when does perception drive value? So for usability, we need to think about who's using the software. And the example that I gave you guys, who's using the software is the systems engineer who built the system and knows how it works and what all the buttons and features do. And so they might not need a lot of professional user interface development unless they just really, feel good and motivated looking at really nice screens. But, if other people who aren't experts in the system are going to use the software, they might have different needs. We need to look at, for those different people who are using the software, how does getting work done correctly and efficiently drive business value? So in terms of who will use the software, typically these are going to be test operators, systems engineers, service technicians, and customers. Each of these individuals or kind of roles, they're going to have a very different level of understanding of the system. They maybe don't need to know how all the nuts and bolts work. And then they have a very specific set of things that they're going to get done when they're working on the system. A test operator wants to, maybe they don't even get to choose what tests they're running. Their job is to pull the thing out, fire it up, wait until the system tells them that the system's wired up, hit the test button, monitor progress. When it's done, unplug the thing, tack it up. A systems engineer might want access to all the low-level under-the-hood stuff. They might be actually adding new hardware components or swapping out cameras and recalibrating stuff like that. Service technicians need to diagnose problems, recalibrate. An end customer, it might be if you're shipping a commercial product to end users who this device or instrument or system is kind of like a black box. Okay, and I'm talking quickly because I've got a lot to say today. Perception. Who's going to see the software? And how does their perception of the software drive business value? And you'll hear me say this over and over again, drive business value. At the end of the day, for the most part, the code that we're developing, the systems that are being built, that it has to be generating business value in order for it to be sustained and successful, and for the company investing the money in the software development, the system to be sustainable and successful. So it's really important to frame everything up around how does it drive business value. And perception can affect business value. So who's going to see the software? This can be users of the system. It can be, let's say, a team of systems engineers who are kind of helping build and design a system. It can be stakeholders like managers. It can actually be investors. I've seen cases where a startup company, the inventor in the lab or garage, wants to invite some people over who might spend money, invest money in his or her idea to help get that to market. And it can add a lot of value if it looks nice. And if they can see what it's supposed to do and wrap their head around what it is, as opposed to just, a big dashboard of tab controls and lots of buttons and things like that. And customers and partners. So again, if someone has built an amazing system and it looks ugly, that reflects poorly on the amazing hardware system and technology. However, if it looks nice, then people's perception is, oh, if it looks this nice on the hood, my guess is it probably also works great. Or at least they're not distracted by how bad the user interface looks when you're showing them the system. So since usability and perception drive business value, the user interface and user experience design can make a huge difference. So it seemed like everybody in the room kind of agreed that they care about it. Hopefully that little kind of bit of background was useful for kind of framing up some of the whys and whens, and maybe that'll help you kind of carry forward investing your own time in nice looking user interfaces effectively. All right, I want to transition now and just mention some free tools from JKI. So the background on that is at JKI we take design seriously. We have for years been building, professional commercial products written in LabVIEW, used by lots of people, including our customers' systems. So we've done a lot of work learning how to create great-looking user interfaces in LabVIEW. We employed a professional designer to help us develop user interfaces and user experiences and workflows for our customers, kind of custom themes for their own applications. And, I personally, I love LabVIEW, and it kind of pains me when I go into a customer site and they have LabVIEW and they want to make their system better, and they say, yeah, but we need to get off LabVIEW because it looks horrible and this and that. And it's like, well, it doesn't have to be that way. The reason why LabVIEW systems typically don't look professional is it's a combination of the fact that the default controls in LabVIEW don't necessarily look like they were designed by kind of a modern professional user experience designer. And then also too, a lot of these systems are designed by engineers who maybe either don't care so much about how the thing looks, or maybe who just don't have the skills. They can appreciate it, but for whatever reason, their brain just isn't thinking about pixels and colors and things like that. So we really would love to kind of help other LabVIEW developers build better looking user interfaces, because we think in general it just helps the LabVIEW community. So has anybody here used the JKI flat UI controls? Awesome, cool. So many of you may know that we've been working on and have released the 2.0 version of the flat controls. And in the process of releasing the flat controls, we actually realized that the whole actual user experience for getting the flat controls and putting them on palettes, it was just painful. And so we had a little kind of proof of concept and decided we would actually kind of deliver them differently. And what we decided to do was to put all of our flat controls into a new palette. So this is like the LabVIEW controls palette. It's a tool that installs into LabVIEW. You can open it with kind of a quick drop keyboard shortcut. You can also pin it down or launch it from the tools menu. And it provides you a visual controls palette for all of your controls. And I'll show you what that looks like here. And you can see I can even resize it and scroll through the different controls. And it's a real what you see is what you get controls viewer. And then oftentimes people want to quick drop shortcut, so I can pop that open. And if I'm looking for an arrow button, and I can tab through, hit return, and click down and have the button just like that. So that's just kind of a quick demo to show you guys what I'm talking about there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what are in the JKI Flat UI Controls 2.0 for LabVIEW, and then how some of that's evolved since 1.0. Is anybody familiar with the material design theme? Okay, so has anybody heard of Google? There's actually people in Google who do some LabVIEW as well. So Google has a few software products out there. And Google, the Android OS, they have, obviously Google Apps, Gmail. They've got a ton of different software out there, and they put a lot of resources into developing kind of user experiences that are easy for people to understand and use. So this is just kind of a quick screenshot of just kind of some of the things. And these are all in kind of a very flat theme. So a lot of modern user interfaces use what's called a flat kind of style, which means that there's not a lot of edges. So when the eye is looking at it, if you actually did a cross section of it, you'd have lots of little step functions, but you wouldn't have lots of ups and downs. And What that means is the eye, your neural network pattern matcher of your brain that's looking at your screen and trying to find out what's useful information. You don't get distracted by things that aren't actually helpful for understanding the state of the software and then what are clickable things that I can press on to do work. So it becomes very easy for me to kind of see what's important because there's more signal to noise, essentially. So that's basically what flat is. It just minimizes the signal to noise. So it was designed by Google for a more consistent user experience. So the flat UI controls 2.0, this is just kind of a big overview screenshot of what's included. There's buttons, there's strings and numerics, raised clusters, everything you might imagine needing. And what's new in 2.0 is, as I mentioned, we use the material design style in order to give LabVIEW basically access to this contemporary look and feel. And then from 1.0 to 2.0, we did some major improvements to buttons. All of the buttons, kind of colorable parts, we made like native LabVIEW kind of like colorable decorations. So we can actually recolor the buttons a lot easier, including programmatically. We also made a lot more of them kind of natively resizable. We did have some issues in 1.0 where you would resize certain things and they would stretch. We've gone to some pains to make most of them resizable. And then also have some hover effects. And I'll just show you kind of what I mean by hover effects here. Pop this open and just drop kind of a couple more here. I'm going to go into, I hit Control M, so now I'm in edit mode or run mode. And you can see when I hover over the buttons, they kind of change to indicate, so that's pressed now, and if I hover while it's pressed, they have a slight hover effect there. And then this button here has a little hover effect that shows a little circle now. So do people in here know about like hover effects on some buttons? Okay, so some people may or may not know all of the system controls tend to have hover effects, but a lot of the other styles in LabVIEW don't. And then also what we did is we added integration with the JPI design palette to kind of completely redesign the user experience for finding control things in LabVIEW. And just to kind of jump ahead, one of the things that we also did is we added support for themes, and you can actually add your own theme. So if you have your own kind of button set or controls that you reuse frequently or even for a project, there's just a folder where you stick all those CPL files, and this will suck them up and load them for you. Okay. So I already showed you a little bit of the design palette. I'll keep going. So in terms of the buttons, and this gets into a little bit more about like some how to create professional looking user interfaces and kind of some of the concepts behind what makes things kind of professional or more usable. We have some 40 by 40 icon only with transparent background buttons. So this set of buttons just look like icons. And it's only when you hover over them that you see a round background. And so these are really useful in areas where you have, kind of limited space constraints. And a good example of that would be like a navigation bar or a toolbar. The flat UI, the design palette has some of these up here on the navigation bar. If you had like a little work area, like a little image area where maybe you were kind of letting users define ROIs or zoom in, out, and you wanted to allow them to do operations on a selection underneath your work area, you might put these up at the top. So they're really nice because you can put a bunch of them in there in a tight space, and the user will then hover over and see that they're clickable. So we've also added some of these buttons with, we call them 40 by 40 icon only. So they do have a background, and these might be useful in a case where you actually have a little bit more area, and maybe the user's attention isn't on a work item, like an image that they're trying to find the ROI. And so you actually want to draw their attention. Maybe they have 4 choices, like the software opens and you tell them pick from one of these 4 choices of things you want to do today. So you want their attention drawn to the buttons. So you would use a button that actually looks like a button because that's the primary thing that their eye should be drawn to. And these are a lot more like traditional buttons. One thing I'd also say is sometimes these little icons, you may also want them, rather than kind of a typical mechanical action where they bounce back and they take an action, you might actually want them to convey state change. So when you click on it, maybe some action occurs, but that action is to transition the system into a new state. And then once the system's in a new state, you'd like the button to reflect the state. So a perfect example of that are these buttons here. So, and I think in the newer versions of LabVIEW, and I actually went away from the square buttons and to more hoverable buttons that don't actually have like the square on them. Is that true? My brain's thinking that, yeah. And so that's actually an example of what I was talking about here, where it makes more sense to only show that it's a button when it's hoverable, because I want my attention and my pattern matcher to really be focused on my front panel. And then when I run it, you can see all of these change their visual appearance to reflect the state change of the user interface, and now convey to me that it's a slightly different action that's going to occur on the state of the system when I press it. Okay? Oh. So we also have some buttons with icon and text that are wider. Ignore this text only button, that's a bug in my presentation. But there are many cases where if your users aren't going to interact with the software very frequently, and they may not just intuitively know what the iconic representation of the button is, it's nice to have text on there as well. So these buttons have both. That might be good in the case where you have a test operator or something. And then we also have a text-only button. Strings and numerics that all look pretty nice. Other types like piece of resources, charts and graphs, and more. These are kind of fun. We added these radio buttons. Let's see if I can find them here. So these are enums, actually. And so what we found sometimes in our applications, we'll want a like a system tab control. Again, I don't always like tab controls, but sometimes they're useful. So if you have a tab control, each page, well, this is an enum type, so we made kind of a radio buttons that kind of looks almost like a page selector. And so when you click these guys, it looks like buttons, and it's kind of cool when you want to add a new one, you can just kind of copy and paste another one, and it adds it down, and they all have icons, which is nice. We also, just because, you know, what's flatter than a borderless cluster, we took the borderless cluster that's available in various places like Lava, and we added that to the Palette View. Has anybody used the borderless cluster? No. Okay, so what you'll find is if you're creating an array of clusters, you don't want the extra kind of couple pixels of border because it takes up usable space that you may want to save for other clickable elements, or maybe you've got a 2D array of picture controls and you actually don't want any gaps between there. The borderless cluster is kind of the best you can do. It was kind of hacked together. People want to take credit for it, they can, for the hacking. So that's there. And what else here? Any questions at this point? Yes, David. So the license is that you can use it all in your commercial applications. That's the super short answer. The other thing that I'll say is we do have a little FYI about the licensing on the product page for this. If you go to jki.net/tools, and so it's licensed. anything that you get from somebody that's, a company or even open source free stuff, it's going to have a license. And this one is, one of the very simple kind of freely available, use it for whatever you want. Don't sue us. Please don't say we're endorsing your product, stuff like that. Excuse me? Or what, yeah. It's something else, yeah. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's on the webpage. Okay, so I'll just give you guys a little bit more of a demo. I've been, so one of the things that we really felt is you should be able to search for things. So if I'm looking for like an up arrow button, you should be able to find it. And then you can kind of hover over them to see their name. If you show the hover text, we actually show you the search keywords so that later you'll know why it showed up in the search query. And then if you hit Control L, we'll also show the labels on it, which gives you slightly more information. We also have the ability to just restrict it to certain themes. So if you only want to see the system controls, you can do that. We ship the design palette with a classic and a system palette, and then also the JPI flat UI controls. You can add your own stuff to that. On the system controls, we added a system cluster, which is kind of hard. I'm guessing you probably can't even see that at this point. But what is nice about it is it uses a little system frame, and then it's got the label of the cluster kind of appropriately placed, like you might find like a group of settings or something like that. And then we even colored it with the same coloring of the system label, which is kind of cool because then when you change your background color, it adopts the color of its background as its background color, which means it continues to cover up that frame, which is kind of a nice thing. And then we also did the same thing for like the arrays as well. We have a system array, and then we have another one with a little incrementer because sometimes people want to use the system theme. And then, I don't think this one has it, but we're adding things like a clickable hyperlink. I think this one has, so when you hover over stuff, sometimes it's nice to have hover effects on text. And so these are actually implemented as buttons that'll be coming in the next release of the flat UI controls. We've been working hard to make it really easy to push, not push, but to make updates available. So you'll see that there's an update available, and you can click that, and it'll update you to the latest version. And then the other thing that we've done here, as you can see, we've added some user interface tips into the info dialog here. I'll show you that again. And you can click through to get new tips. Some of these are kind of just announcing the release of it, how to create like a drop-down menu in the flat theme. I just wrote this tip a week or so ago on how to create a flat title bar that's kind of non-standard, larger than usual in LabVIEW, and kind of walk people through kind of the whys and the different steps. So we're going to be continuing to put articles out there as well. The other thing that I'll mention if you start to use this, if you're looking for something that you can't find, like a rocket button, because you work for a rocket company or something, you can't find it, you can send us a message. This goes right to my inbox, so you can send us feedback, like I'm looking for this or that, or there was a bug or something. Or you can go to the discussion forum. We have a really active group of people that have been adding suggestions and reporting bugs and stuff like that. So we've already gone through an initial kind of release, and then we've done a major kind of bug fix release on both the flat UI control and the design palette at this point. Any questions about the design palette or the flat UI controls?
The pallet just be included with Kring pallet?
So the question was, is the pallet just included with the regular pallets? So can it be? So you were asking, can these controls appear in the regular pallets instead of the design pallet, or what?
Well, I right click on the front panel
Mhm.
and I get, the plastic and modern and blah,
Yeah.
blah. Can it just be right there?
It could. What we decided to do, it was going to take us a lot of effort to get it into the pallets. We now have to create an iconic representation of every button that tries to convey to users what that button looks like. And we were just like, it wasn't worth it to us. And so we put our energy into building more kind of this what you see is what you get editor. So no, you could install this, and if you wanted to, you could drag them all over into your user lib or something like that, but we decided not to at this point.
So how do you get to it then again? Can you show us how you get to that again?
Oh yeah, sure. So there's two ways to get to the design palette. There's from the tools menu, you can choose design palette. And when you do that, it pins it down automatically for you, just like if you were to go right click and pin. The other way to open the design palette is you use it in a quick drop mode. So you hit Control Shift Space. So it's just like, quick drop is Control Space. This is just a shift away from quick drop. Control Shift Space. You can still use quick drop. Yeah, Control Shift Space pops this open, and then in that mode it works just like quick drop. But really, our intention for this is we want to evolve this tool specifically to help people design better user interfaces. Along those lines, there are some Easter eggs. This isn't extremely useful right now, but we're playing with it. If you type "I want different colors," it pops open those little color selectors, and then you can kind of play with that. It doesn't really work right now, intentionally, but I added it to see who would complain about it not working. We have a really nice little user guide that includes some Easter eggs and other fun stuff. So it talks about how to add your own themes and controls, how to get that I want different colors. There's also an interaction mode, allow interaction. Again, I'm not sure how necessarily useful this is, but we've been playing with it. So if you click or type allow interaction, it shows you this little checkbox. And in that mode, it actually lets you, let me see if I can find the slider, for example. So if you want to see how things work here without actually dropping them on your front panel, you can do that. But we're thinking about what other features we could add to this that actually allow people to more easily and naturally choose colors and basically edit their user interface the way that they want. So if you have ideas about that too, let us know, but we've been doing a lot of experimenting at this point.
You just need to convince NI to make the other pallets all busy like that, so then you can integrate all that.
That's true, yeah. Well, sometimes the best way to convince NI to do something is to do it, and then they see how it can be done. Right? We've seen it work, right? Yeah, that works, right?
Question?
Yes.
Have you considered making this palette, maybe API for creating your own palette available?
Have we considered making an API for creating your own palette?
Say I wanted a palette that wasn't just for your life, want to create a palette or something.
Can you give me like a little example that kind of describes what you would want to create and how you would want to create it with the API?
Yeah, with the feedback manager,
Yeah.
you can have packages that are specific projects. I'd like to be able to ship something that is defined out of the those packages.
Oh, okay.
And then that future, like in the palette API going full.
Okay, so I think what I heard you say is you would like to be able to kind of have like a definition of like a theme or a definition of what's in a palette for a project, and then for that to somehow kind of appear, and you would want these controls either programmatically created, or you would want just the linkages from controls that are in your project, or all of those are great ideas.
I'm thinking more of a functions palette than a control palette.
Oh,
Take your
okay.
idea, apply it to reusable code instead of just control.
Oh, okay, so I think what I'm hearing you say is, this looks great for designing front panels. I have a project with a bunch of VIs, and I would like a more usable functions palette. Got it?
Yeah, something that I can build, because I also feel pain with having, when we use GPM and we distribute our packages, there's no palette for those because they're specific to the project.
Yeah.
So if I could point a project to a definition file for a palette, and then just have it open with the project,
Yeah.
that'd be really fun.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we have built LabVIEW palette editors and viewers purely in LabVIEW. So yeah, we've done that. Yeah, so that's a wheel. So right now we're kind of focusing on the front panel. Yeah, thanks for that. So the other thing too, what we've done is it'll show you when there's updates available, and you can pop it open. It'll pop it open in VIPM, and then you can ask VIPM to update it, and it'll update it when you start it. Any other questions? Yeah, there's lots of, go ahead.
Could it be available in offline install?
Yeah, if people email me and we'll email you like a package configuration file so you can install it. We also support an offline activation. I'll just mention, so to use it, basically you just type your email address, we'll email you a 6-digit code, you type it in, and that's the only pay to play. Gotcha.
Which versions of LabVIEW?
15 and greater on Windows, 32 and 64-bit.
You talked about adding themes of other palettes. Are you guys finding any support for palettes that might already be distributed via NIVM, since those would be located at a different file path?
So, we've had people say, this would be great if I could see everything everywhere in it and have an easy way to do that. So it's not our intention to go find necessarily like ways to kind of pull everything in. If people wanted, who are building those packages, if they want to have their package target the design palette, we could do that. I think if you want to play around with it and you've got a good idea, I think the best thing to do would be to shoot us a suggestion and say, I want that, because basically we're adding features based on what people care about. Yeah.
So I really like the hover feature for desktop and computer use, but then I'm also finding a lot of interfaces, UIs I'm designing are more touchscreen oriented.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you were going to have your designer look at UI features that might be useful to include in the palette for touchscreen.
Yeah, like, are there any specific ones that you're thinking about?
Not in particular, but just because Hover has been in LabVIEW for a while, but you rarely see it implemented, and I see that you guys have really elegant implementation with this theme. And so I was thinking, I'm an engineer, I'm not a designer, and you guys have the resources to think about, these are things that could make a LabVIEW interface look more professional for a touchscreen that people aren't using.
Yeah, what we found is these buttons also work great on touch UIs too. However, you're kind of right, the user on the touch screen isn't going to have an opportunity to hover to check if it's a button, so it might need to look a little bit more like a button so that they know where they have to stick their finger. Yeah, that's a good point. Other questions? Yeah?
You mentioned the product has to be activated. Any implications with DXEs?
Oh, so the design palette needs to be activated, the flat UI controls do not. Yeah. Yes? Yeah, Chip?
Can the decal be recolored from dark gray to something else, or is it defaulted to that color?
So out of the box, no. You can, if you know what you're doing, you can go into the controls editor and you can change the color, but it's not something we have programmatic support for. We're looking into, ways to improve that from an editor experience. Yeah. What I will say too is people have posted in our forum saying, I wish I had like a rocket button, and we'll post an example there and tell them where to drop it. So it's relatively easy for us to make new ones. Yeah, next question. Yeah.
If we already have an existing UI and we want to upgrade to use some of these, is there any way of replacing the existing controls with some of these?
So we don't have a programmatic way to replace them. So you would, okay, so let's say you have an ugly button like this. Sorry, I randomly picked one. It came to me, I didn't come to it. And so I'm going to select it and quick drop it, and then I'm going to look for a better looking, like an arrow button, because I want it to actually be an up arrow. And then I hit Control P, right, for replace. It'll replace it. So that's probably not what you're talking about, but
That's what I was hoping, something like that.
Awesome, high five. Yeah.
So what are the different ways that you can bring up this?
So there's two ways. You can Control Shift Space. And I think Control Alt Space works too, because we're playing with both. Or you can go to the Tools Design Palette. And then the other thing is, if you install this, it'll pop it open after the first installation so that it's open. And then when you close it for the first time, it'll say, by the way, if you want to open this again, you open the Tools menu or yeah. So the other thing too, it'll tell you too that there's a new tip that you haven't read from JPI, and that'll go away if you just kind of click on the info. So we're trying not to do too much of a pain. Yeah, John?
One of the common UI controls that's missing from LabVIEW is the dynamic tab that is used in a lot of other, like a web browser. And I'm just curious, I know that there's an X control out there that gives you that, but it's an X control.
Yeah.
Is this something that you would be able to add to your palette using the technologies you're using to say, like the way you created the dynamic radio button, things like that?
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering if that's a possible
So
solution.
you're wanting a tab control that has like, you can add new elements to it?
Yeah, at one time, yeah. Just like opening another tab on a web browser adds another.
I don't know, I'll look into that. I don't think so. But
The way it works with the X controller, that hosts a subpanel,
oh, okay.
and that's how the tab page appears.
Oh.
But yeah, I would really be curious to see if you can solve that problem without using the X control.
Okay. All right, other questions? Yeah.
Can you stretch a button? Just grab a corner and stretch it or shrink it?
Yeah, you can. It goes like that currently. If you want to do it in a way that doesn't get super wonky, you can open it in the controls editor. Multi, and then you click here, and then you can resize stuff in a way that looks nice. These are things that we are aware that are painful. So the first painful thing we solved is we wanted a visual controls palette, and we wanted to make sure that all the parts were kind of recolorable and stuff. Kind of the next thing that we're looking at is all these different modifications that people will want to make to them, and then how can we kind of expose those in a good way for users. But yeah, we can technically, theoretically do all those things. Yeah. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Can you use the flat controls without the design tab?
What do you mean by use?
Just put them in my user.
Yeah, so what you would need to do is you would need to install it and then get them into your user list. But that's an exercise left for the reader at this point, yeah.
What's that? It's pretty easy.
It's not impossible now. Next question.
This is pixel-based files.
What's that? Meaning non-vector based?
Those are pixel-based, yeah.
Yes, because
So
that's
what
what I-
happens when you transition to NFT?
Oh, you tried? I didn't try yet.
I mean, you use
Yeah.
this palette on your project.
Right,
You switch to NFT like in a couple of years.
yeah,
So you stop using these buttons.
yeah.
How do you transition to new projects?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it still feels like it's gonna be some years out before we're building super sexy user interfaces in NXG. So I don't have enough information about NXG and how the transition will work. I do know that we can have in our package, we can have a meta file that says how code nodes migrate from one version to the next. If we were to make these type definitions, we could have that file that tells NXG how to replace the controls and things like that. Yeah, nobody's paying me to do that right now.
Well, maybe I should pay you.
Well, please compel them to pay me money. So I guess maybe we're on the list of things that I want you to take home today. So the JKI Flat UI Controls and Design Palette helps you build professional UIs. It's easy to search for controls and you get a visual interface. You can add your own controls and themes. I don't have a bullet for it, but it's free for commercial use. You can use all these buttons in your own applications. There's a license, read it. It's pretty simple to comply. And then also too, I mentioned to you, I want you guys to build nice looking UIs in LabVIEW, help spread the word that LabVIEW can make professional user interfaces. I'm putting out some what I believe are pretty useful tips. I've kind of collected what I think are kind of like some really kind of important tips and tricks and how to use stuff. And I'll be continuing every 2-3 weeks posting a new article. You can get those in the design palette on our blog at JKI. And then, people are asking questions about recoloring, resizing, stuff like that. There's going to be more good stuff to come here. So also too, professional UIs and LabVIEW matter. It seems like everybody here cared about that. I'm happy to hear it. We try to make a big step forward, and I'd like to help get you all the way. I will also mention, we have a professional designer at JKI. Companies actually hire us. Usually it's after we've started working on their project and we're like, hey, a sexy user interface would really, be nice and your customers would love it. I give them the first half of my presentation basically. And they pay us to have our designers spend a couple days building them their own really nice theme. We have some examples of this coming up on our website. And it really does make a big difference. And basically what we then give our customers, and you guys could hire us to do this too, is you then have a palette of your own control indicators, buttons, knobs that are possibly even domain specific for your application, plus some template kind of fully laid out screens with everything. And then some customers even actually have us build entire kind of like screens with workflows and click through mockups and things like that. So we can do the full user experience as well. So this is my thank you, and there's some links on there and my email address if you want to contact me. Thank you, everybody.